You have worked hard, seized every opportunity, and given your best at work. By age-old wisdom, your hard work should speak for itself, right? Then why do so many people in the US still dream of being their own boss? Because no matter how dedicated and loyal you are, eventually many hit the limits of the corporate world. In those moments when frustration meets ambition, the desire to take control of one's own destiny begins to grow. But the path to entrepreneurship can be challenging and uncertain. And that's where franchising offers a powerful middle ground, the chance to own a business while leveraging proven systems and support. In today's episode, we will explore the world of franchise ownership. Welcome back to Career Calling, your ultimate guide to navigating the world of work, one profession at a time, to help you find your calling and turn it into a career. I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. My guest today is David Busker, founder of FranchiseVision, a national franchise consulting firm, and author of FranchiseVision, Transform Your Future Through Franchise Ownership. David has guided hundreds of candidates through franchise discovery journey. Today, he will share with us all about owning a franchise business and how to go about choosing one. Hi, David. Welcome to Career Calling.
Hi, Pratibha. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, current times, you may be very well aware that there are a lot of changes that are happening in the professional world in certain industries than the other. But a little survey from Gallup tells that 6 out of 10 Americans express interest to become business owners. But the world of franchise is something that is on a lot of people's mind always, but I think more so now. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you as an expert who has helped a lot of people.
Absolutely.
To start with, can you give a brief about yourself? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an independent franchise consultant, and I help people who want to own a franchise business to determine their criteria. I educate them on franchising. It is a regulated process, so it can feel a little unusual when you go through it, but we help people with that. And then once we determine their criteria, we match them to brands that are going to be the best fit for the right business model, because there are all kinds of business models out there. And then we guide them through that investigation process of looking at a narrow group of options that may fit their criteria, and then working with them to narrow that down until they decide that one is the best fit, and then they sign a franchise agreement. So we guide them through that whole process.
One of the most common things that you would hear, or when people are thinking about businesses, is should I own a franchise or should I start my own business? That's a very common question that I always see. It almost seems like to me that there is a lack of understanding of what a franchise is. So let's start from there.
Okay.
What is a franchise? How is it different from owning your own business?
It's not different than owning your own business, because it is owning your own business. But it is a way to leverage your time better. If you're going to start a business from scratch, okay, we all think of like Silicon Valley, and I start a business in my garage, and then I have to go raise capital in a Series A and a Series B, and you're doing all this. But there's a reason that the successful ones in that arc are called unicorns, right? Because it's so rare. And most of the businesses in America are not Silicon Valley. They're not unicorns. They're not starting some completely novel idea from scratch. They're saying what is needed in the community, and they're providing a service that delivers that. And that's not always so glamorous and exciting, but it is many times a very direct way to start a business. But even if you decide to go do an everyday essential business, an everyday essential service, it may be an industry you have no background in. And a lot of people want to start a business, and there's what I call the 4 horsemen of motivators, or rewards for starting a business. So if you have a successful business, they're going to give you these rewards. I always ask my candidates when I start the process, what triggered this? Why do you want to become a business owner? And it's some variation of 4 things. It's number one, most common thing I hear is I want to control my own destiny. right? I want to be in control of my outcomes. And as you move up the corporate ladder, what happens is when you're starting your career, you're new or fresh in your career, you work harder, or you do things, and then your outcomes move in lockstep. I work harder, I do this, I get a big project, I get promoted, and you move up, I get a raise. And then what you find is when you get to the middle management or executive ranks, what happens is your efforts are still continuing and your outcomes start getting disconnected from your inputs or your efforts. And so a lot of people want to, they're like, whether I succeed or fail is less dependent now on what I do. It's much more dependent on some board of directors or reorganization or a acquisition. So they want to control their destiny. They also want financial security, right? Which corporate America is less inclined to give these days. They want time freedom, and they want purpose or meaning. A lot of people will say, I've been selling widgets for 25 years, don't really care about widgets. And they're looking for those rewards. Now, the problem is, of course, is that's great. A successful business can give you all of those, but getting from here to there is a challenge. And if you're going to start a business, how do you do that? If you're in your own industry, maybe you can pivot. Maybe you can be a consultant. Maybe you can do a self-employment job of some sort and deliver your expertise directly to clients. But outside of that, a lot of people struggle, right? They're like, man, I've got friends that own some really boring business and they're really successful at it. And I don't know how to do that. And that's where a franchise can come in, because a franchise it's not doing the business for you. It's not creating a different business. What it's doing is giving you a license and an operating system so you can step into an industry that you don't have a background in. So it allows you to pivot industries and utilize all your experience, your leadership, your management skills, your people, your sales, marketing savvy, whatever you have, the executive skills, the management skills you created, it allows you to take those and apply them for your own business in a way that's for an industry that you find attractive, but you don't have a background in. So that's really the thing. Because if you start from scratch, man, you have to not only learn the industry, you'd have to create the business. And why not just go out and find a franchise that meets all of your criteria, and then we do that.
When I look up, or generally what is out there in the internet, there are franchises anywhere from office supplies, businesses, to home servicing, to food industry, and so many varieties. Are there any categories or groups that are more standard in the space?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, the biggest category is our restaurants, right? And that's what immediately most people think of when they think of franchising, are restaurants. However, that being said, even though it's a huge category of franchises, it is not right for 99% of people. And the reason is it's high capital. They're typically location based, so you need brick and mortar real estate. They're very capital intensive. They all require you to be full-time owner-operator. A lot of people want to be part-time or have a manager-run business, and that's not allowed in restaurants. And then finally, they're low-margin type businesses. So they take a lot of volume, and you need multiple locations. So it takes a lot of capital. That doesn't mean they're not right for some people. I just placed someone in a restaurant franchise just recently, and it was a perfect fit because it was a family. Two successful parents had two brothers, two sons that were both in the restaurant business, working for other people, had great skills and experience, but wanted to run their own restaurant. And they were willing to be full-time and run it themselves. That's a great setup. Or if you're going to have a family, sometimes we have immigrants, right? Foreign nationals that come to the U.S. and they know food. They may not know some of the other nuanced cultural services that might be here, but they know food, and a franchise can provide them an immediate blueprint that they can come in and then just operate with their family and that kind of thing. So it can be right. However, the other categories, most of what we spend time with are service-based brands and location-based brands. They're performing some kind of service. there really aren't any retail franchises left, except maybe in the pet space, real specialty stores, but you really can't compete with the Walmarts and the Targets and the Amazons. So retail franchising doesn't really exist, but retail services definitely do. And there are categories of them. The biggest category that we work with are home services. So residential type home services, which can be two buckets. One bucket would be low ticket, recurring subscription based home services. So think about pest control, think about lawn fertilization, think about irrigation or pool maintenance, things where people are going to buy your service on a subscription every year for a maintenance kind of thing. So that's a big category. Those tend to be very time leveraged for the owners. The other big category in home services are project based. So these are big ticket, non-recurring type services. So think about any big projects for the home: kitchen remodel, roofing, siding, flooring, window treatments, those kinds of things that can be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 and up per ticket. And so those can launch very quickly, but they're non-recurring. So they tend to have more of a sales and marketing focus, whereas subscription-based is a lot more marketing driven for customer acquisition. So those are two big buckets in home service brands. And then on brick and mortar, what we see more are lifestyle brands. So think health, wellness, fitness, beauty brands, med spas, lifestyle type brands. All of those are in typically in more of a consumer location-based brick and mortar.
Mhm. What about things like vending machines or laundromats? Can they be part of a franchise as well?
Absolutely. We work with laundromat franchises, for example. Those are really high ticket, very expensive, very capital intensive businesses, but they behave a little more like real estate. So at the more semi-passive, semi-absentee end of the businesses that we work with, you have those ones that kind of behave more like a real estate investment. If you think of, if I own an 8-unit apartment building, like it's not a job. I don't show up there every day at 8 a.m. and have something to do, but they do require the owner, projects and things. You have to lease it out. Maybe it needs rehab, maybe it needs a new roof, it needs maintenance, but it's not a job operating business that you're there every day. Once you get it leased up, you may not necessarily have to be there that much. There are some franchises that behave like that. Laundromats come to mind. Salon suites is a big category that's very successful and more real estate based. Large type family entertainment centers like mini golf or Sky Zone, which does indoor trampoline parks and family entertainment centers, those kinds of real estate based location, entertainment, experiential type businesses. So there are a number of options, but they tend to be high capital. And so they do not fit most candidates because they simply don't have the balance sheet for it. But we run a range. We have ones that are really low cost, self-employment jobs where you just work for yourself by yourself, more like kind of what I do, all the way up to those I'll call investor class franchises where they may be $2 or $3 million investments.
Mm-hmm.
If you provide a service that is needed in most communities, if it scales, meaning it can be needed across many markets, then yes, it's typically can be franchised. We have a franchise that does window boxes. So they plant window boxes for homes and businesses on a subscription model. That's a franchise. We have a franchise that does lymphatic drainage body sculpting. We have franchises that do some unusual things that are maybe unique in their category, but they are services that in every market, there is a latent demand or customer base for that service, so they can expand nationally. So there's no right or wrong thing. The federal government that regulates franchises really doesn't care what your business is. But if you're offering franchises, then you have to disclose information in a certain way. You have to make filings with the federal government in 14 states that also regulate franchising in addition to the federal government. So there's some hoops you have to go through to sell franchises, licenses. I tell my candidates, I say, look, the franchise companies come from all stripes. Some are Fortune 500 publicly traded companies. Some are startups. They have one location and they're ready to invest and go national, and then everything in between. So some are family owned companies. I'm in St. Louis. There's a really good franchise here that's been here for 50 years and franchising for 25 years. And they're really family owned and steady Eddie and not super exciting. And they're just a wonderful company. And then there's ones that come out with a lot of private equity money and they want to grow quickly. And so they do also have different features, cultures, and getting that alignment with a candidate is also important. It's not just about the service. It's not just about the cost. There's these other features that some people want to be a pioneer, right? They like having the founder on speed dial and helping build the brand. And then other people say, no, I want a brand that has hundreds of locations. They've made every mistake and there's really not much they worked out everything that can possibly happen. And it's more of a corporate kind of environment for them. And they like that. So it's really just finding the right match business model for you.
Are there typical structures in how these licenses are structured, whether the profit sharing or the operating models and stuff like that? Are there specific structures or it varies a lot?
There are a lot of similarities among franchises. Companies that are emerging franchise brands, they want to learn best practices. They want to follow in the footsteps of other franchise companies that have made mistakes and they want to learn from that. So there are some similarities. There's no standard. There's no law about what you charge or how it works. But generally, most service brands that we see do have some similarities. When you review their franchise disclosure document or FDD and you look at the fees that they charge, the franchise fee, the royalty, the marketing fund, the tech fee, a lot of these things, some of them can be fairly common. Royalties, for example, restaurants tend to be lower because they're low margin, high volume businesses. So they tend to be in the 4 to 5% range. Most service brands that we work with are in the 6 to 8% royalty range. Marketing fund or brand fund sometimes it's called, which is national marketing that helps every franchisee. Typically is also charged for most brands. That's usually 1 to 2% of revenue. And then those are the two big ones, really the royalty and the marketing fund. And then there's some other fees that are very common, like a tech fee. If you're using a proprietary software for that franchise system, obviously it might be customized for that brand, but there's a cost associated with it. So there might be a fee for that, but those are services you're getting. If you start your own business, you have to pay for software as well. But if you're getting one customized for your business, for example, so those can vary a little bit. But I would say beyond that, the franchise fees are all fairly consistent. Typically $40,000 to $60,000 is the most common range of franchise fees that we see. A few are outside of that, lower or higher, but the vast majority of them tend to fall in that $40,000 to $60,000 range.
Is there a huge variation in the operating style? The whole purpose, as we discussed earlier, is that people want to be their own bosses, right? How much hands-off they will be or how much freedom the owners get in how they operate? Is there variation there?
You get 100% of freedom. No one's going to run the business for you. They're not going to tell you what to do. You're going to sign a license to use their trademarks and their processes and that kind of thing. And then it's up to you to go out and get customers and make that business work. So really some people say owning a franchise, you're not an entrepreneur. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. You definitely own a business. I've owned a franchise. And while it was great that my franchise had every resource I might have needed to run my business, every checklist, how to do this, how to do that. But once I got operating for the first year or two, I really didn't need their support from that standpoint, although it was always there if I was training a new employee and that kind of thing. But they never once told me what to do. If you're operating and you're in compliance, you have a resource there, but it's not like an employer-employee relationship whatsoever. It's up to you. Now, there are some things, obviously, if you own a Subway franchise, then you have to buy your meats and cheeses and bread from Subway. And there's what they call required vendors. So depending on the service that you're providing, there may be some required vendors that you have to use. But
do they have a say on the location? Do they prefer?
yeah, they'll have to approve the location. That's a good example. So if you do have a brick and mortar franchise, you will have to get approved for the franchisor will have to approve your location. Most of the time, most franchise agreements require that. There are some that franchisors that don't care as much. They're like, oh, you want to go be over there? Go ahead. But I think most good franchisors want to do a collaboration with the franchisee and on big decisions like that. If you're going to be a location, it's not because they just love being in charge. It's that obviously they want you to succeed and they want to, it's a joint venture a little bit. It's like a partnership, I'll say, in a way. And so they have a vested interest in you having a good performing location. So usually you're going to rely on them anyway, because they're going to have good software that knows where their demographics and psychographics are, where their customers are, and that kind of thing.
Let's double click a little bit on the life cycle of owning a franchise.
Yeah.
If I'm complete novice, which I am, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
What are the initial research or education one should give themselves? What should they really know about owning franchise?
Great question. I think, first of all, I think that you just need to first understand some of the background in owning a franchise business in general. Even though they're all industries and categories, I think stepping into business ownership, franchising, because the franchise support development goes across all these industries, there are a lot of best practices. There are trade shows and conferences that can help you with resources, with education. You know, I'm big on education. You can see I wrote a book over my shoulder. By the way, I'm happy to send that out for free to any of your listeners that would like that. But it's a good foundational guide for how going through it, what to expect. One of the things I always tell my candidates is if there's something you're trying to learn about, one of the best ways I learned was I got a Kindle Unlimited subscription from Amazon, which was like $10 a month. And I just checked out book after book on starting a business and what I needed to do if you want to learn about franchising. And there's lots of books out there. All of those things, spend a little time and research, get the background on it. And also, of course, there are professionals that can help you, like myself. That's what we do, right? It's people that they see the benefits of owning a business. Like I mentioned, the 4 horsemen of motivators, they're motivated, but they don't know what they don't know. And so we can help them learn about franchising, guide them through that process, give them resources, how to investigate a franchise. There is a process that you should go through. There are things that you can do that are standard because of the way information is disclosed in the franchise process, the sales process. There are some things you can do and compare these different brands and business models side by side, have a much better experience in trying to understand what to look for and that kind of thing. But if you don't want to use a guide, that might be your shortcut. You could certainly educate yourself. I say do both, but if you have a good franchise consultant, they can certainly coach you through the whole process.
So it's about knowing what category or what type of franchise you want to own, how the business model works, and what else? Is there anything else in terms of investment?
Yeah, obviously there's, when we say, how do you find a franchise business? When you go through and you're investigating a franchise business, there are some criteria. And I think the most important thing you can do is set those criteria up front. And sometimes you don't even know what you should be looking for, what you should be asking yourself. What do I want in a franchise? And so when we take our candidates through that process, we're determining a few things. There are black and white kind of more concrete criteria that you must establish. So number one is, what are you financially qualified to do? Do you have any money? Some people come to me and they're just financially not qualified and they want to own a business. I'm like, that's great, but you don't qualify. The minimum franchises we work with typically you need $50,000 of liquid capital and you need $150,000 net worth. So if you don't have that, at least that kind of financial qualification, you might get a side hustle, you might do a vending machine, that kind of thing. But a franchise is going to be a little bit higher required capital. So financially qualified, you also need to have a budget. You might be qualified for something that's really expensive, but you don't really want to invest that much in a franchise. Your financial qualifications and your budget are not always the same thing. Also, you need to know geography, what franchises are even available in your market. Again, when I'm working with a candidate, I'm doing a territory checks for many brands to determine which ones are even available in your market, because many of them will sell exclusive territory. So you have protected territory to operate your business within, and so no one else can come in and purchase that territory. So many brands, if you're in a hot market, let's say like Dallas, Texas, I just have a candidate from Dallas this morning, and I had to explain to her, like, you're in a very high demand market, which is good, but it's also a high growth market. So those services are in demand, but also the franchises are in demand. So we're typically working with very new or emerging brands in a market like, let's say, Dallas, but other markets can differ. So understanding territory availability, and then getting into more the intangible things. The number one most important criteria that you can figure out if you're going to own a franchise business is the owner's role in the business. So there is a spectrum of how you may interact with that business. I define it as self-employment. So that's you're working for yourself, by yourself, no employees. It's the lowest cost of entry. It's also the most flexible because you don't have anyone else to manage. Great flexibility, low cost of entry. That's great, but it's a full-time job. It's not as scalable. You want to build an enterprise or you want to go semi-absentee, then self-employment options probably not for you. But as you move up the scale on capital required, your time commitment can come down. So they become more scalable, more capital intensive, but also less time intensive, or your time is more leveraged. So self-employment, you move up to owner-operator brands where you're full-time in the business, but you have employees, and maybe over time you can build that business bigger and step out of it through a manager. We have executive models, which are designed to be manager run, where you're not directly providing the service, but you're sitting on top doing the strategic stuff, typically full-time or hands-on starting out of the gate, but then quickly scaling the more scalable models. And then you move up to semi-absentee. So these are models where they're designed to be manager run out of the gate, day one. And those typically are going to be location-based, but not always. Through technology gains and platforms, now a lot of these service brands have become more semi-absentee available. So there are some service brands that have they have call centers, they have these kind of support structures so that the owner can hire a manager to run that business. They were typically, historically, more owner-operator service type brands were. Now they can be more semi-absentee. Location-based brands have traditionally been more manager-managed or semi-absentee. And then you move up the scale from there into more semi-passive. Nothing's truly passive in franchising. So if you own a business, it's not going to be a passive, just go buy stocks and bonds. But there are some that I mentioned that behave a little more like real estate. So if you know in real estate, they call that a passive investment. But if anyone's ever owned rental real estate, sometimes things come up or you have to take care of things. And there are some franchises that behave more similarly to that. So they're not full-time jobs, but they require a lot of capital.
Excellent. How much of an importance the skill that I already bring in matters in the category that I choose? Like, for example, as a lifetime tech professional, can I get into a restaurant?
Right. That's a great question. That's a great question. So it really depends on what is needed from you in that business. So let's move to the higher end of the scale. If it behaves more like real estate, those franchises are looking for candidates primarily for their balance sheet, right? They're looking for people with a lot of capital. It's not going to be very time or management intensive from that standpoint. It's not an operating business that you need expertise in, but you need a lot of capital. So that's your kind of criteria. On the other end of the spectrum, the lower end of the investment spectrum, I have a candidate right now, and they're looking at a self-employment option. It's a cost optimization franchise where you're working for yourself, by yourself. You're more of a consultant.
Hmm.
So it's more like an interview process because you have to do the work. You're the professional. If you think of if you're going to be a solo attorney or an accountant or something like that, you're working for yourself, providing services, but you have to have the expertise. And so the franchise in those types of models allow you to switch industries. They'll give you the blueprint, but you have to have the right characteristics. And so even if you don't have experience in that industry, you may need certain characteristics to do that. For example, if you're going to be in a self-employment option or a white collar coaching consulting type role, you have to do business development. So you have to network. You got to go out and be in front of business professionals and companies and clients, and you have to have that kind of aptitude. So if you're a tech professional, it depends. What kind of tech professional? Are you leading teams and are you managing clients in the tech space? Or are you sitting in a room just coding software and never talking to a human? Those are two different kind of tech backgrounds, right? And I do my best to match people with that. I just placed a tech background candidate recently, and he wanted something that his English wasn't that great, and he needed something that was consumer facing, right? Not B2B, where you had to develop relationships because English is a second language. And so we were able to line him up with more of a consumer facing frozen yogurt brand. So that was a restaurant kind of, I'll call food and beverage.
Uh-huh.
So food and beverage can work sometimes as a semi-absentee type model versus a full restaurant or a fast food chain, that kind of thing. But matching that up where I couldn't put him with a B2B or a sales driven kind of model. He needed to be in that consumer facing model versus some other people they're outgoing, they're warm, they love being in front of people, they like networking, they like going to community events, they like being out in that kind of thing. Then you can match them up with the right model to take advantage of their characteristics and background.
Can somebody with no working experience but with capital own a franchise? Like I have inherited someone else.
These are very good questions. Lots of capital, no experience. So if you don't have any experience, you must be very young with a lot of money. I would say it's very difficult. It's very difficult to start any business and not have any experience. Like I said, there are some very capital intensive investments where you can hire that operating partner, or you can bring an operating partner in that's going to run the day to day, give them some sweat equity, and you're bringing in mostly capital. And there are definitely opportunities for that. My franchise, which was a semi-absentee fitness brand, I had an operating partner, and he was able to come in and run it day to day. And we structured it with some sweat equity for him. And he was able to do the operations, and I could handle the kind of the back office and the oversight and that kind of stuff. And it worked pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason I asked is in tech, as you know, it's almost glamorized college dropout starting company and startups. That's the reason I was asking. All right. So now I have researched, I have made my decision, hopefully the right one. I was also going to ask you, what are some of the top mistakes people make in choosing what kind of franchise before I move on to the next stage of the life cycle?
Yeah, very good question. If you read my articles and some of the things that I've written over the years, one of the things I talk about is don't make your hobby your business, right? Some people are very passionate about something or they love that. And there are a lot of passion industries in franchising. So think about pets, think about children, think about senior care, think about fitness or lifestyle brands. There's a lot of categories that people can be very passionate about. And sometimes they get fixated on that. And if that meets all of those hard criteria we talked about, and also your intangibles, then that might be a great choice. But you don't want to put the cart before the horse, right? You don't want to force that if it's not right for the business model that you need. I coach candidates all the time about you got to focus on the model, not the widget. So that is something that we definitely see that can be a common mistake. Those people working with consultants typically don't make that mistake, right? Because a good consultant's going to coach you on the business model. And then let's forget about the industry. Like we'll get to that. Mm-hmm. Let's focus on the owner's role in the business, the profile of it, how you're going to interact with it, those kinds of things. How many employees is it going to have? Do you love employees or do you hate employees? I love sales. I hate sales. People tell me all kinds of things. And it can make a drastic difference between which model is going to be the best match. That would be one common mistake I see people make. I think the other common mistake is being undercapitalized. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that people fail, and people ask me, it's a common question, how many of your placements are successful or fail? And I ask them, you got to define what is success, what does that look like, and what is failure? And because people have different definitions of those things. But one of the most common ways or causes of failure is just being undercapitalized, and they want to stretch themselves and they have no margin for error. So if the economy dips into a recession or something changes, or God forbid, COVID hits again or something like that, they don't have any cushion or enough working capital to get them through those obstacles. Even though there may be nothing wrong with the business, some models just ramp a little more slowly than others. And so it just takes a little while, but once they get ramped, they're durable repeat income streams. And so you got to have enough runway to get yourself from here to there and don't be undercapitalized. And that is also something that consultants can help you with, because every brand, usually in working capital in their item 7 of the FDD, only discloses the minimum required by law, which is 90 days. But some brands take a significant amount of time. They may take 6 months, they may take 12 months. And so you need more working capital to get you from launch to stabilized.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I have now, let's say, an idea what I want to own, at least the industry or the type of franchise. What's the next step in the life cycle?
If you already know the brand, you know the industry, or you know the brand?
Industry.
If I know the industry, then I would want to dig in and start talking to franchises in that industry, compare and contrast several of them, look at the sponsorship, look at their experience, look at a lot of the fees that they charge, look at all of those things. And then the most important thing you can do when you're investigating franchises is validation. So validation is when, the disclosures that the brand gives you, the franchisor is going to give you that FDD, which is 200 pages of all kinds of info. But ultimately, where you're going to get the best information is talking to franchisees in that system. So the franchisees who have been through it, they started their business, they've been operating, some are newer, some have been around a while, and talking to as many as you can in a cross-section of those franchisees, that's your best information. And you can determine then, are they more like me? Do they have the profile? What does success look like in that system? And do I, in the attributes I have, compare to the people who are successful in that system? Am I more like them, or am I more like the successful franchisees in this other brand? And so we coach candidates to really conduct that validation, which is the most important piece. Once you've decided, that I really like this industry, then narrow it down, do your due diligence, and ultimately the end of the process would be meet the team day or discovery day and decide if you're going to sign a franchise agreement.
So usually these research, like about the specifics of offerings, you go and research on their websites, these brands' websites?
If you're working with a consultant, right, it's a good question. So if you're working with a consultant, what we're going to do is we're going to help that develop that criteria. Then we're going to match you to usually the top 3 to 4 brands that are going to fit exactly what you're looking for. And the reason is because you can't look at them all, right? It's overwhelming. Even more than 3 can be overwhelming for a lot of people, because once you decide on, let's say there's 3 brands you like, you cannot see their business model on a website. So the next step is you're going to register with those brands. Now, either you're going to do that directly because you've researched the brand and you're reaching to them directly, or you're working with a consultant who's going to register you with the brand. So they know you're my candidate and you're with my network. So we're going to get you registered. Then that brand is going to reach out to you, and you're going to begin a series of one-on-one discussions with each company. So that gives you, if you're going through an introductory call, you're going through unit economics, you're going to go through a similar process regardless of brand. So whether you're talking to McDonald's or Great Clips or Orange Theory or Lawn Doctor, you're going to go through a similar series of calls and process and disclosures. And so the good part is, because even though they might be in different industries, you're getting information in kind of the same format and the same time frame, so you can compare and contrast those. But really having those one-on-one discussions, those calls, a series of calls directly with the brand, is how you're going to learn about the brand. It just takes some time. It doesn't cost you any money, but it does take time to get through those and to do it correctly. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this process. And the right way takes a little bit of time investment to go through those calls, watch the videos they want you to watch, read the FDD, do those validation calls. And a lot of them will have things in place that make it easier, like group validation calls, or they may have leadership calls where you can ask questions of the management team or the CEO or the founder. They'll have a process set up for you, but follow their process and get that information directly and then validate it with the franchisees in that system. And that's the process you go through, ultimately culminating in what's called Discovery Day or Confirmation Day. Once you've narrowed it and you've said, okay, I'm 90 to 95% sure this is my brand, then you typically are going to go to what's called Confirmation Day or Discovery Day. It's the last step in the process. You're actually going to meet the brand. You're going to experience it firsthand. You're going to meet the founders and the executive team, and then you're going to make a decision after that. Hopefully, it should be a yes. So I always say Confirmation Day is really about red flags. So it's like interviewing for a job. I think I want the job, but then you meet the CEO or the founder, and do I really agree with their vision? What are they trying to accomplish? And the greater cultural fit. So that's the last step, because usually you're just getting information up to that point.
What about the other side? They have to veto it as well, right? They have to confirm you as well.
Great question. You're asking a lot. I think you've done this before. You're asking really good questions. So that's the other flip side of this. And more recently, just the last couple of years, I have more and more candidates who are really, there's a lot of information out there, right? There's podcasts, and if you just Google franchising, it's overload, right? It's just noise. And so a lot of people, they don't follow the processes, right, very well. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give candidates, if you're going to investigate a franchise, follow their process step by step. Don't ghost anybody on calls. Make sure you communicate your status. They're fine if it takes slower, or I got to go on vacation, or I have my kids' recital or whatever. Can we reschedule? Totally fine. But communicate and manage expectations, because at the end of the day, they have to award you a franchise. It is a mutual fit. They're not selling you a used car. This is something that they're not just trying to sell franchises, right? They're trying to identify qualified candidates that are a good fit and are going to perform well in their system. And unfortunately, a lot of people see it as a sales process, and they don't really respect the people they're working with or the sales process, and they get rejected. And I've had it multiple times. And even though I coach the candidate, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, and they're not following the process. And then unfortunately, they get rejected. The brand's like, they're not a good fit for our system, and we're not going to award them a franchise. And I think some people don't listen to me, unfortunately. But what's interesting is every candidate that I've had get to Discovery Day and get rejected has ended up in a franchise. They realize, oh, I have to change what I'm doing. And then they've ended up signing a franchise agreement with a different franchise. But it's always disappointing when you get rejected, and I've had candidates rejected earlier in the process too. Just like, hey, your candidate's not a good fit. They're not really doing the things we need them to do.
Let's say all of that is cleared. I got the confirmation, signed the agreement. What are the next steps? What are the first things that one should be doing? I understand probably this differs a lot from the type of the franchise, location-based, non-location-based. But are there any typical things that you would advise?
You mean as you're getting ready
or starting
a franchise? Last step.
Mm-hmm.
You may want to hire a consult a franchise attorney, right, to review the document for you. Franchise agreements are not very negotiable. They're very standardized and they're not very friendly when you read them. They seem pretty draconian. However, the reason is because they need a consistent brand. They need things to be the same in every market. So if they're cutting in separate deals with every franchisee because they want this or they want that, then the brand's not consistent. So they have to maintain that consistency. There are some individual things you can negotiate that are unique to you, say like territories being one of the biggest ones. So if that's something that no other franchisee is going to have that, then it will be dealt with in an exhibit or an addendum to your franchise agreement. So those things can sometimes be negotiable. But that being said, a lot of people find value in hiring an attorney to understand all the pieces of the franchise agreement, what they're obligating themselves to, where their exposure areas are, and where the franchisor is sometimes maybe out of the norm. If a good franchise attorney's worked on thousands of franchise agreements and then they review yours and they say, this one term is very unusual because your franchisor is doing something that most franchisors do not, then that helps you understand where they're maybe off track. So legal review is one. Financing, of course, is one of the biggest things that we work through when you're getting ready to sign a franchise agreement. And I help all my candidates with understanding their financing options and how to go through those kinds of things.
I want to touch upon maybe 2 cases when you're doing a franchise and understand how that works. Let's say you started operating successfully, you have done a lot of things, hopefully, and then it's running well, but your parent brand goes out of business.
Oh, okay.
What happens in such scenarios?
Yeah, I'm aware of a few of those. It's not very common. Not very common. If you go back into the 90s, Quiznos was a famous case that went bankrupt, but it's not very common. You don't see very often, but I know of a few instances of that. And really, a franchise agreement is a license agreement, right? It has obligations. It's a contract between 2 parties. And so if the franchisor cannot perform, let's say they can't operate, they go bankrupt, you have the right to get out of that contract and terminate that agreement. So you can still operate, right? You may have to switch brands. So if a company goes bankrupt, right, there's going to be a bankruptcy trustee, and the assets, which are maybe all that's left of the intellectual property and the brand name, you may have to change your name or do a different brand kind of thing, but you can still operate your business. They can't take your business away from you, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's complicated. It would not be good. I have a friend who owns a franchise, and the franchisor, it is a food and beverage concept, and the franchisor is not doing well. And a group of the franchisees are talking to get together to buy the intellectual property rights so they can continue to operate under those marks. And they're all operators. So they're like, okay, we can get our own supply chain. We can continue to operate our business. We just need the name. We don't want to change the brand name. So they're in the process of the franchisees getting together to buy the intellectual property to continue operating. That would be case by case. It would be very difficult if the franchisor goes out of business. Unfortunately, any business, franchises are like in all other businesses, other than the fact that they're franchises. Some companies are good, some are bad, right? Some are Fortune 500, some are mom and pop, they're all very different, but there's certainly some bad franchise companies out there. And that's where trying to filter that information, or work with somebody that works with these brands all day and is in it all day, every day, and knows the good brands, the good systems that are validating and performing well.
So the other part of the same equation that I wanted to understand is, let's say you own a franchisee, you have done all the things that is in your control, but still you don't succeed. In that scenario, is it just you getting off of the contract, or you're responsible for selling that?
Again, my advice is to anyone, if you're going to start a business, whether it's a franchise or not, you should understand your exit strategy, right? And so I do think it's important, if you're going to sign a franchise agreement, to understand your exit strategy. Now, realistically, franchise companies that are trying to grow, They're going to sign you to a 10-year agreement. But
Mm.
in my experience, they don't want to disclose anything in item 3 of their FDD, which is litigation. No franchise brand wants that. It's in their best interest to help you out. If you're struggling as a franchisee, in my experience, most of the brands that I've seen that we work with that are good companies, they're going to help you out. They're going to help you sell that to another operator so you can get out of that. They're going to help you if you just fail, completely close. But it depends. I personally have never seen a franchisor sue a failed franchisee. I've never seen it happen. They have the right to. It doesn't mean they can't. What's in their best interest? If you're 3 years into a 10-year agreement and you fail, are they going to sue you for those 7 years of minimum royalties? That'd be their economic upside. But if you failed, then you probably don't have the money, right? Or are they wasting their time? I can't predict the behavior of any company, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV. However, I can share what I've seen, which is most commonly, if someone's complete failure is struggle, brands will often terminate the contract, right? So you're in default for some reason. If you're not in default, then you can continue to operate. But if you failed and you're in default or you can't make your payments for minimum royalties, then they may terminate your contract and then sell that territory to someone else. And most of them also have the rights, particularly if you're brick and mortar, like my franchise, they had the right that if I just ghosted them or I moved out of the country or I just whatever, they have the right to take over and step into the business and operate it. So most brands they're going to reserve the right to step in and operate it. And for example, if you have a lease, there's a subordination clause that the franchisor is going to have. Part of signing that lease is the franchisor is going to have an agreement too that they can step in and operate that franchise if I'm in default, right, as the franchisee. So there are some legal contracts in place that can help that. It's a doomsday scenario. You don't see it very often, but of course, that's like insurance. You have it just in case you need it.
Related to this, you touched upon this, but I also see this question a lot or discussion a lot, is that people planning for owning a franchise as an investment. I want to invest in a franchise and bring in people to operate, or almost I want a side hustle, right? So my question is, can franchises be side hustles? Can you be completely hands-off where it can be a
most side hustles, there's a hustle there. That means you're working. A side hustle might be I'm doing some arts and crafts and selling on Etsy, or I'm doing a drop shipping thing or whatever, but I'm working to make that money. And franchising as a side hustle, it depends on how you define it. But if you say I have an extra, 10 to 15 hours a week that I can put into a side business, then yeah, there are many franchises that can operate that way through a manager, but not truly passive. If I just want to invest in a franchise, but I don't want to ever be required to work in it, I just want the economic benefits of it, you need to find a partner or someone that is truly going to operate it that allows you a passive investment. I would say if you're really looking for a passive investment, don't look at franchising. It's really not a good fit. Even the semi-passive ones are going to require you, if you're in salon suites, you don't have to have any employees, right? It's more like owning a piece of real estate. But when you're trying to get that thing built and get it leased up in the first year or two, it's going to take some time and it's not going to be passive. So I would say generally they are not very good as passive investments. I think there are a couple companies out there that are trying to develop operating companies that will operate franchises, and you can own a piece of those operators just as a passive investment. I think there's some out there that are trying to be developed. I don't know too much about them, but most people that I'm talking to, they don't want partners, right? And that's the commonality, is that I want to own a business, but I don't want to go out and raise capital. I don't want to have operating partners. I want to be able to make the decisions and control the business. And so if you have control, then, you probably wouldn't have partners.
I just want to get through a couple of discussions that I see it a lot. So I think I should ask. One of the common things that I see pop up is, what are some of the low capital, high returns franchising? Is that the right way to think?
The lowest capital are typically the highest return franchises.
Uh,
Let's put it this way. Let's say we find a franchise at 75,000, I'm all in. And then by year 2, I'm making 150,000 a year out of that business. That feels pretty good, right? Wow, man, my return on capital is phenomenal. I only invested 75 grand. I'm making 150 a year. But but it's a full-time job and I was making 200. Now I'm making 150. It may not feel very good. So the question when you say return on investment is investment of what? Of your time or your capital? Because the return on capital is phenomenal for the low cost franchises, but they're full-time jobs. And some people, that's not what they want, or they value their time more. So as you go up the scale, salon suites, for example, is a great return on your time, but they're a lower return on capital. But they're such a big investment, they can still replace your corporate salary if you're successful, assuming that. So that's it. You got to define what you mean by return on investment. Investment of what? There's time and capital. There's also expertise. If you work smart and you really know what you're doing, you know how to assemble a team and hire good people, you can be very leveraged in franchising. These are not complicated businesses, right? They're typically simple, single service businesses that don't require a lot of complexity. They don't have their cash businesses. You're not taking receivables or selling multi-year software contracts or things that are complicated. These are, hey, you want the service, I provide the service, you pay me. And if you're good at those things, you can scale them, but it's really return of capital, of time, and expertise. All three of those have to calculate. And what's interesting to me, I've been doing this for a number of years now, is that how people value their time. And some people don't value it at all. They're like, I'll work as many hours, and they're just looking at a return on capital number. And they're like, I'll work as whatever it takes. And then I have other candidates that are like, I don't want to put any time in this business at all. I just want the maximum return. I just want to not have to work in it as little as possible. And that's how they value the investment or the return. So it's really individualized.
But is there a kind of upper limit on the type of franchise you own? You can know that this is the range in which you will get returns. Like, for example, if you own a restaurant, the type of margins you have, the type of money you can make per year may be very different from something that is a services, for example.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of commonalities. For example, with restaurants, they're going to be high capital, they're going to be high volume and lower margin, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just can means that you know how that's going to operate. Other ones that, if it's a self-employment gig, what's interesting is, hey, your very first revenue that comes in, you're profitable, right? Because you're working from home. I have very little to no overhead. So the first commission check I get, or the first revenue I get from a client, I'm profitable. And so it can be immediately profitable, but there's barriers and challenges with each one of those. If you open a restaurant, day one, you may have people lined up to get food, right? Because it's a location and people see it and they're going to come and buy your product. If you're in a self-employment gig, you may have to go out and develop clients. And so it may not come day one, all right? You have to develop relationships. And so there are some commonalities, but it's nothing standard. And the other thing I say is that every franchise system is like a classroom. Somebody is number one in the class and somebody is dead last. So somebody in America is the worst performing Chick-fil-A. Somebody is the worst McDonald's. Somebody is the worst Great Clips, whatever. But somebody's also number one. And so when you talk to franchisees, you're going through validation, right? If you're talking to the top people in the system, you're talking to a cross section, and the people at the very bottom are probably not very happy. But I think if you identify you're mostly like the people at the bottom, then that's not the franchise for you, right? You should identify the top performers in that system. And are you more like them? Because that's what success looks like in that system. And that's your best source of information, is look at the people in the top third and say, am I like them? Are these my people? Is this my tribe? Are these the ones I identify with? This is where could be a good system for me. And also look at the averages, right? If you say, if the average revenue, let's say you're looking at a location-based brand. Maybe it's a lifestyle brand, let's say fitness or something. And you look at the average revenue, and their average revenue, it won't even hardly cover break even, then maybe that one's not such a good investment. So I think it's a combination of looking at averages and looking at this, what success looks like in that system. And I generally say, if you don't believe that you can be in the top third of the systems that you're wanting to look at, I wouldn't do it. There's no guarantee of how you're going to perform. But a lot of people want to know, right? How much money am I going to make? I don't know. Are you going to be number one? Or are you going to be dead last? Or are you going to be average? If you tell me that, I can tell you how you're going to perform because we have the history, but we don't know how you're going to perform. And the biggest risk is execution risk. I will say one of the things that's driven a lot of interest in service-based brands is you reduce a lot of the location risk or the site selection risk that you have in those location-based brands, brick and mortar, because there is variability, right? Density and a 10-minute drive is really important for a location-based brand. But if you're in a service-based brand where you're going to the customer and it's a low overhead model, your risk is really execution risk. Can you execute? You follow the system? If it's a big category, let's say painting, we don't have to sell our concept to the market. There's a huge market for painting. You don't have to describe what it is. It's latent demand. It's in the marketplace. So in that kind of business, it's not very glamorous, but if you execute and you have better software, communication tools, GPS, text, I'm communicating with the customers. It's a rich experience for the customer. They don't really care who paints their house, right? But they do care about their time. And someone didn't make me wait I had to be there between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. I had to sit there for 6 hours, and then they came at 4:59. And no one wants that anymore. And franchises have solved a lot of that, right? For the franchise owner themselves too, because they know where their employees are. They can have GPS. And so that customer experience can now reduce your risk because it's execution risk. And now you can reduce that execution risk in a very high demand, liquid type of market for an everyday essential service. So I think that's one of the things that I say is something that is a huge benefit of franchising, and it outcompetes the local competitors.
I think it's something on the similar lines, like you said, how much money can I make? I've seen this question pop up, which I thought was pretty funny, but I would ask, are they millionaires? People become millionaires by owning franchises.
Of course.
Which I think is, to me, in this question, there is an element of ceiling that people assume compared to starting something on their own versus owning a franchise. So how do you address this type of question?
It's a great question, but it's really scalability. Now, there may be a ceiling on your revenue, let's say for a brick and mortar franchise, right? So if I own a hair salon or let's say a Great Clips, great model. If I drive too far away from that Great Clips, there's another one, right? Yes. You're working with a certain radius, and that can put a natural cap on your revenue potential. But if it's an easy repeat business model like haircuts, as long as you hire and you have a good manager and good staff, people are going to keep going back and getting haircuts. But you can expand horizontally, super scalable. It's easier to run 20 Great Clips than it is to run one, right? So if those kind of models are super scalable. There's people that own 50 Great Clips, right? Or 100 Great Clips or those kinds of things. And they're much more time leveraged than, say, a restaurant, which is much more complex, right? Supply chain, all kinds of different things going on. If you're just providing a service with limited retail and that kind of stuff, they can be very scalable, but also service brands can do that too. So I think it depends on how you look at it. The other thing that came in franchising in the last 5 to 10 years is platforms of service brands. So a service-based brand where you're providing a service out in the community, now there's platforms of brands that use the same back office, the same call center, the same software, the same systems. And so you buy one territory or 2 territories or whatever, one brand, and then you can stack a second brand on top of it and a third brand, providing a different service, but your customer demographic's the same. You're using the same database. You're using the same software. So it becomes scalable in a more vertical way versus, say, brick and mortar, which is scalable more horizontally. Takes a lot more capital to scale horizontally. If you have capital, you can if you take the income you're making and then open a second one, open a third one, and just keep going, you can get as big as you want oftentimes.
So it's really the business model, how scalable that is, plays a very important factor.
Correct. Not all of them are scalable, right? So if I'm in that self-employment option, I might make a nice living, replace my income, but then if I want to build wealth, it becomes harder because I can't scale what I'm doing. If I'm just a single consultant, I'm selling my expertise, my services. It's sometimes that the model doesn't allow you to hire more consultants or expand that way. So you can, but the other thing you can do is a lot of candidates that I have are looking to replace, they want to get out of corporate America, replace my income. So they can go into kind of an owner operator, self-employment gig, ramp quickly, get that income replaced, but then have the schedule flexibility to start building other businesses on the side, real estate and another franchise or brick and mortar and those kinds of things, which are slower to ramp, but become durable income streams over time. So you can combine the two. I was a full-time consultant the whole time I owned my franchise, and it was a perfect complement. Once you become an entrepreneur, you own more businesses, that you keep thinking about the next business maybe that you want to own.
That's a perfect segue for my next question, which is your journey.
Yeah.
I would like to remember, how did you get into the world of franchise?
Right. Great question.
Yeah.
Like many of my candidates, I was the avatar of many of my candidates, right? I started my career at a Big Six national accounting firm. So I'm a CPA, right? I have a financial background. Then I went to a Fortune 500 company where I did M&A finance work for 5 years. And in 2004, one day, new boss came in, hadn't met the guy, and he was bringing his team from a former company. I lost my job, right? Hadn't even met the person. So that was my first experience of, it doesn't matter what you did, had nothing to do with your performance. Suddenly you're corporate America and you're out of a job. So I'm like, okay, well, that didn't feel so good. So I went to a smaller company where I was CFO and then later promoted to CEO of a real estate investment company. Smaller company. I was higher role. I could control my own destiny better. Loved it. Great industry, commercial real estate. Really enjoyed it. Fast forward, the owners got to be in their 70s, no kids in the business, and they put a new legal board in place. And the board looked at everything and it's like, why are you doing this? And they outsourced all of the real estate management. And I was CEO and I lost my job again. And that company doesn't exist anymore. And I joined a startup company, and which I knew was high risk, high reward. And I was 6 months into that going, okay, good idea, but I don't think it's going to work out. And so I started looking at some other things, looked at a franchise, worked with a consultant, and signed a franchise agreement in 2016 with a friend of mine who was out of a job, loved the idea of being the owner operating partner for the business. So we started that. Signed in 2016. It was brick and mortar, so it took a while. We had to get the location and build it and construction, all of that. So we opened in March of 17. And the day we opened, my boss emailed me and said, hey, we're out of business and today's your last day. And so that was the third time I lost my job due to organizational. And in 26 years, I was in corporate America. I had 4 companies I worked for. 3 of them do not exist today. They're completely not there. Crazy, right? And when that last one happened, I had seen that coming, and I got into the franchise business as a franchisee, right? And I loved all the owners. The other franchise owners, these were my people. My dad was a small business owner. I love the idea of franchising. There's no red tape. There's no bureaucracy. Nobody can fire me. It's a pure execution risk. Can you execute? You can perform, then you get the rewards. And it's all on you. And I was ready for my success to be tied to my efforts and not organizational nonsense. And that really resonated for me. And that's when I became a consultant then in 2017. And I've been doing this for 8 years, and it allows me to have all the flexibility for my family, own other investments. I have real estate investments and have a broad mix of things that I do. but have complete freedom of schedule, which is what I really value more than anything.
Finally, for those who are thinking about franchise space, who are trying to learn, what are some of the resources that you would recommend?
Obviously, I have a website, happy to share any information. Like I said, a free copy of my book. For the majority of the candidates I work with, even the ones that do a consultation and go through the process, the majority of them do not sign a franchise agreement. And that's okay. The challenge is that until you get in there and you can talk to these companies, you can see the business models, you don't even know if it's for you. And sometimes it just takes going through that discovery process to understand it. So I think having someone help you understand what's out there, just educational. I have a newsletter. I've written books. I've written articles for entrepreneur media that are out there, lots of videos and things. But I'm not the only one that provides resources. There are lots of other good resources out there. You can go to the International Franchise Association. There's entrepreneur.com has a big portion of their media and I publish articles for them. So a lot of that's on franchising. There are a lot of educational resources there. Starting a new business, I mentioned, do some of your own research. A lot of great podcasts out there. So there are a lot of consultants. Some of my colleagues in my network have good podcasts that you can listen to. And you'll hear all kinds of things, right? You're going to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think is one of the things, advice I can give you is just develop a filter, right? There's lots and lots of data points, and you have to start picking and choosing which data points are important for you, what you're trying to understand, get good information. And a good consultant is going to give you their time, right? That's all they have to sell. And it doesn't cost you anything. But some of my candidates today, good point. I had a candidate today that signed a franchise agreement that I first started working with 5 years ago. So in 2020, started working with them. And now, not continuously, they haven't been talking to brands for 5 years, but they started the process in 2020, decided the timing wasn't right. We went back, we went through the process again in 2023 and decided it wasn't right. And then 2025, we went through it again. And that's okay. I'm so happy for them because they knew they wanted this as a long-term goal, and they both have corporate jobs, and they finally got to the point where one of them is going to quit their corporate job, run the business, and get it started. And so exciting. So there's no right or wrong ways. That being said, earlier this year, I had that family I mentioned that started beginning to end in 3 weeks and signed a franchise agreement. They were on a mission. They were already about to sign with a different franchise when they came to me and realized that they might want a different alternative and found even a better brand, a better match for them. So it can go very fast, it can go very slow. And I think if you find somebody that can help you, that's a good resource, but also Entrepreneur and some of the online resources and of course, FranchiseVision.com.
David, this has been an extremely knowledgeable session. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Career Calling. I hope you found it helpful. I'll be back soon with more stories of professions from all walks of life to help you find your calling. Until then, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word.